I'd like to start with what I'll call the big picture of China. Of course, we all know it's got a huge population. I'd like to start with what I'll call the big picture of China. Of course, we all know it's got a huge population, nearly 1/5 of the world's population, 1.4 billion people, still the largest country, slightly larger than India. Secondly, it has an enormous physical area. It's actually the 4th largest physically in the world. Thirdly, it's the longest continuously existing polity, or if you like, political unit in the world. It is over 2,000 years old. Chinese civilization dates back at least 4,000 or 5,000 years. Remember, it will be the most important country in the world. So this is a remarkable civilization which seems to me has no obvious parallel or peer in human history. But there's a problem, or at least the West has a problem, a very serious one. We don't understand China. We don't get it. And the reason we don't get it is that we try and understand China in our own terms, in Western terms. But you can't understand China in Western terms. But fundamentally, China is very different from the West. It always has been, it still is, and it always will be. The problem is, I suppose, the Western mentality. You see, for 200 years, starting with Europe and then later the United States and so on, the West has dominated and effectively controlled the world. So that we think of modernity as Western modernity. There is only one form of modernity, that is Western modernity. But this is simply not true. We have Chinese modernity evolving rapidly now. It is simply not true that there is only one form of modernity, a Western modernity. There will and are already many modernities in the world. So in this context, the idea that everyone must be like us, everyone should be like us, is wrong. In other words, we have to understand China in its own terms. We cannot understand China in Western terms. And this, by the way, our mentality is why we don't understand China. This is why we get China wrong. I mean, I remember vividly in the late 20th century, this was largely, they're exaggerating the figures. The statistics aren't true. It will never be possible to sustain this. We were wrong. We were hugely wrong. We didn't understand China. Another proposition was that unless China has a political system like ours, a Western-style democracy, China's extraordinary transformation will not continue. It will be unsustainable. Well, here we are now in 2020, over 30 years after the great reform started in China. The Chinese political system remains as different now as it was before. There's no question at all, in my view, that, especially given it's a developing country, that China has the most competent and sophisticated form of governance in the world. That's the key to understanding, I think, some of China's achievements in recent years. China has never been an expansionist power. It certainly had a universalist view of itself. In other words, that China was the highest form of civilization, just like Europe had a universalist view of itself. The Chinese attitude is, yes, we are, insofar as they thought in these terms, yes, we are the most advanced form of civilization and so on, but we don't want to expand abroad because to other countries and so on, because that would be a step down in comparison with Chinese history and Chinese civilization. And so really there's no tradition in China of expansionism. If you go back far enough, there's a global system, but China was not didn't militarily occupy these countries. It didn't expand in that way. You know, in 1978, the Chinese economy was 1/20th of the size of the American economy, 5%. And then there was what I suppose you could reasonably describe, although it's an overworked term, there was a miracle. China for the next 35 years grew on average at 10% a year. As a result, 800 million people have been taken out of poverty. That accounts for 2/3 of the reduction in global poverty over the period from 1978 till the present. I mean, what an extraordinary achievement that has been. I can't think of another candidate that can shine a light to China that this period of economic transformation is the most remarkable one there has historically ever been. And of course, this process is continuing. We have to take note of China and understand it and have a good relationship with it, a constructive relationship with it, by what I would call force majeure. China has arrived big time on the global stage. For the next century or so, I would say, certainly, China is going to be extraordinarily important in the world, and much more important, by the way, I think, but in a different way than the United States probably ever has been. And when I look back now on the period of this year, I think this was disgraceful. I mean, there was China on its own trying to deal with something that was entirely new. And I think the reason is twofold, to put it simply. The first is that Chinese governance is extremely effective. And I said earlier, and I will repeat now, the Chinese government is an extremely effective institution. I mean, you know, this extraordinary economic transformation is not just because of markets. No! At the heart of China's transformation and the strategy has been the Chinese government. And that is how it has handled COVID-19. Their attitude was, first and foremost, we must get rid of COVID-19. We're not going to live with it, we're going to eliminate it. And by and large, that's exactly what they've done. The second point is the attitude of the people, the way the people think, the way the people interpret society. You see, we pride ourselves in the West on a sort of notion of individualism, and everywhere, including my own country, you know, the rules and regulations being introduced to deal with COVID-19 are being challenged. You know, we need our liberties, we want our liberties, and so on. Now, that by and large has not been the pattern at all in these countries. They understand, people understand the importance of society. It's not just you, it's not just me, it's the impact of me on you. My behavior affects you. My behavior may imperil your future, your life. And so there's a much greater awareness of the importance of society, of social solidarity, of observing rules and so on. So I think this probably brings my remarks to a conclusion. You know, China is a most extraordinary country. Rather than thinking of it as a threat, we should learn about it, be inquisitive, and enjoy it, because it's not only going to become very important, extremely important, already becoming extremely important everywhere, but it's also fascinating.
快来订阅通识，按旁边小铃铛给我们点赞和分享哦。如果有什么想说的，也欢迎在下面多多留言呀。